Hey everyone, Luke Johnson here and Bob Schut. We're going to try to do something a little bit different today. We're going to broadcast live as we record this to see if anyone wants to give us some input on our 15th installment of Soren Kierkegaard's Works of Love. Bob is going to be leading the discussion and I will be moderating any sort of comments or anything like that comes in. I mean, I know that we are huge rock stars and there could be a delay, some latency with getting all the fan mail and all the questions, so I will try to sort through it so Bob isn't distracted, and try to figure out how to share this to Facebook too. So what are we going to be talking about today, Bob?
Well, today we're going to be talking about the building up of love, or love builds up, as the section is called. So that's pretty much all he's going to be talking about today. I found that this section, Luke, was a little bit more difficult in a very strange way, though. It wasn't difficult because it was so complicated. It was rather overly simple. It didn't even seem like it was Kierkegaard, his typical writing. It almost seemed like he kind of took a break and went into more of a simplification of his ideas rather than giving us a very, very in-depth idea here. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get some questions. Maybe I missed something along the way. Maybe you have some questions on this, and we'll see where it takes us. But he starts off with the expression taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. It says, "But love builds up." Now, I think it's probably appropriate, so that we don't take something out of context, to read at least chapter 8, verse 1, the whole verse in question. It says, "With regard to food offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up." So this is where he gets this idea of love building up, which he's going to give us a lot more information on. He starts off with the subject of linguistics. I don't know if did you ever study linguistics, Luke, in your PhD travels?
You mean like semiotics?
Yeah.
You know, I've done a little bit of it lately with building Noetic and whatnot. I've done a few seminars on it. I find it somewhat interesting. But what question did you have in mind? Well,
we're just going to kind of go through it, so I'm not sure. I read a little bit about it, a few books about it, so I have a little background, but not a lot. But we'll see if we get in a bind here. He says that all languages are transferred, so kind of put that word in quotations. Transferred languages or metaphorical. The idea here is that words carry meaning, but are not in themselves meaning. So that the idea of our words that we use to communicate is only symbols or symbiotics, symbols of what we're trying to say. And that's why we have so much difficulty communicating, is because not everybody has the same set of symbols. And words mean things slightly different, especially when we enter into this area here of transference of words, where we're trying to speak to somebody at a higher level. We're trying to speak to them at a spiritual level rather than a literal level. And that makes things a little bit more difficult. He calls the category of the sensual psychical. And that's kind of, I guess, his own term of that sensual psychical, which I believe he means here that such words relate more to our senses, which I guess we could say are more literal. We should take the words more literal, or the symbols, the word symbols, as more literal rather than spiritual. And at the metaphorical level, he says that the symbols don't replace the ones of the psychical, physical, or sensual psychical, but rather it works with it or overlays over these different meanings in order to create a new comprehension. So it's not that when we live in a world, what he says here is that the spiritual man and the sensual man are saying the same thing, but there's a big difference. The sensual psychical man does not understand in the same way what the spiritual man does, even though they speak the same language and say the same thing. So even though we're conscious of the spiritual world, It doesn't mean that we no longer become aware of the physical world. So it's not that we speak in two totally different languages. It's that there's a lot of overlay. And there's a lot of experience that we have to have in the physical world in order to make the higher level meaningful. And I'm thinking right now more like the parables of Jesus. He gives parables to the Pharisees, but they weren't spiritual parables that were so high above them they couldn't understand the language. They were given in a very basic, sensual, psychical language, so the Pharisees and the listeners could understand them, and then they'd be able to get a glimpse of this new kingdom that Jesus was speaking about. So that might be one way of relating to what Kierkegaard is seeing here. He talks about transferred language as language that is already at hand, something that we already use. It's the same language, but it's now transferred. The Holy Scriptures use such transference to edify or to build up. This is what he tells us. And this is what he means by transferred terms. So when Scripture uses everyday language, everyday experiences, but it's using it in a way to speak to us at a higher level, this is what he calls transferred language or transferred terms. It appears that at this time, he's telling us that transferred language takes terms from our physical world and transfers them into spiritual terms. So let's look at the term build up, he says, as a transferred expression. So now he goes back to chapter 8, verse 1, and he says, what does Paul mean here when he says, love builds up? So he says, okay, let's tear it down. Let's deconstruct it, so to speak. We have the verb, to build. And then we have an adverb, up. So what happens when we put to build up together? It says, everyone who builds up builds. But not everyone who builds up. So it's kind of a simple term here. Sometimes we build things, but we're not necessarily building upward. He gives an example here of when somebody builds a house. You don't necessarily build a house up. You usually build onto a house, or you just build a house. You don't say, I'm building up a house. It's just not an expression that we usually use. We usually say we're putting on an addition, or we're adding a room. When we use the term to build up, we might be referring to building from the ground up. So we might say, if there was no house there, we might use the reference, well, we're building from the ground up. If we have maybe 2 stories or 3 stories, we might use that expression he tells us here. Even though we speak about building up, we imply that we must also build down in order to create a foundation to support the building. So if you're going to build a building upwards, you have to also build a basement, a foundation. At least what we have out here in California is slabs. But there has to be something to build the house upon. And so he's giving us that. So I guess since Kierkegaard lives on the far east coast, maybe they have basements out there. So they have to build basements there in Denmark. Now, he wants to examine the term building up in a spiritual sense. So what does it mean spiritually? Building up in the spiritual sense is love. This kind of love does not set itself apart. It's not built on pride or independence, but it's a giving love. It gives itself. So love is to do everything for the sake of building up. It's not the same thing, he says, as having talents, like a person is beautiful or they're an artist, they have artistry. It is one of character and relationship rather than one of just merely a talent. He gives examples of how some things can be built as up. Things that we might refer to say, well, that was an upbuilding experience. He talks about a large family that's somehow forced to live in a 1-bedroom or a 1-room apartment with very little conveniences, a little food, nothing glamorous at all about this. kind of desperate situation. And he says instead of complaining about it, they live a happy life under this condition, lovingly with one another. So he says we look at such an experience as this is upbuilding from observing this experience. So he's giving us a little example of what this upbuilding might mean spiritually. The man who was born without arms and legs, recently there was like a documentary on a man who was born without arms and legs. And I'm sorry, I forgot his name. But he was able to climb mountains. He was a wrestler. He did everything that the normal person can do. But he did it without arms and legs. So an experience like that, observing somebody like that, is an uplifting experience. It builds us up. So he overcomes his struggles. And this is the kind of upbuilding experience he's talking about. When you see a great artist creating a masterpiece, it might be beautiful, but it is an upbuilding. Perhaps if he dashes it to pieces out of love, it might become upbuilding. So you kind of have to picture an artist drawing a masterpiece, and you're watching this, and it might be a beautiful masterpiece, but somehow it's not a spiritual, uplifting experience. But if he takes this after he finishes it, and out of some kind of passion and out of love, he destroys his work, Kierkegaard says we might be able to extract some higher level of spiritual uplifting or upbuilding from this. In Corinthians, Paul speaks a little bit more here about a man who speaks but does not have love. Now he's actually, in this particular verse, is a man who speaks in a manner that cannot be understood. And he says if such a man speaks, he's like a clanging cymbal. In other words, he's just making noise. So the whole objective of speaking words is to speak in terms that we can communicate to one another. If we don't, we're like a clanging cymbal. He says that knowledge can be edifying when love is present. Everything can build up, but it must have love to do so. But it's very rare that one sees something that builds up. So apparently even in his time, experiences that really were spiritually uplifting were far and few between. To build up in this way is to construct something from the ground up. The foundation of our spiritual structure, he says, is love. It must be in the foundation of every person. And this is an idea that he's going to give us here that I have some of my own comments about. But he speaks about the foundation of all uplifting experience is love. He says that if this is about works of love, in other words, he's quoting himself. He said, if I'm writing a book called Works of Love, then we must choose whether a lover implants love in the other person or if love is a presupposition in each of us. This is the area that he's really going to address now. And I guess this is the philosophical dilemma that he's in. He says, if I'm going to talk about love, first I have to decide, is love something that the person, the lover who's trying to speak in these higher terms, is going to implant in the one who is loved from scratch? Or is he going to presume that the individual already has love and he's going to work from that point on?
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
I just wanted to interject this before I forgot it.
Okay.
Your man who's missing arms and legs who climbed the mountain.
Yeah.
I believe his name is Kyle Maynard.
Okay.
And he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
Right. That's right.
And ironically, and he's an entrepreneur and a motivational speaker and all this other stuff I was looking up. And he's from where I'm from. So hey, maybe I'll drop him a line.
Oh, really?
I guess he's from around here.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. That would be a great interview, Luke.
Yeah, wouldn't it be interesting?
Okay. So he says, well, which one do we choose? Is it, do we implant love through our discussions with other people, do create it, or do we merely presume the person has love and work from that point on? He says the reason we choose the second idea is because no one can implant love in the heart of another. It's beyond human ability. It's divine because he is love, because God is love. So it's a divine characteristic, he says, to have love already. So now he's going to further define what he means here in a section called presupposed love. So this is a proper attitude that one is to have. Exactly what he means here is kind of hard to understand, though. Presumed love. He talks about love already existing within man and that God creates it. Now, on my own side here, Luke, my own opinion is that I think I'm in conflict with Kierkegaard on this issue.
Bob, say it ain't so.
Oh, yeah.
That can't be.
How dare I know.
He's like a god to us.
But I believe that we don't have true love within us as a foundation. And that it's more that we have the capacity to love as a foundation. Let me give you an example. It's kind of like a light bulb that does not create light, but rather light is the result of electricity running through a tungsten filament. We don't really create light when we turn on the switch. We simply allow the bulb to function as it's designed to function. Light isn't in the bulb itself, but only in its capacity. So human love here is, it's not that we have human love, that we have love. It's rather that we have the capacity, under the right conditions, love is aroused. I have a difficult time thinking that somewhere deep inside some of these mass murderers, so Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, Adolf Hitler maybe even, that there's really some true love within them. I just have a hard time reconciling that idea. But rather...
All right.
So I would like to hear how would you respond to my conflict here with Kierkegaard?
Well, I would respond to it with Scripture, and I would like to see how your analogy would fit with Scripture.
Okay.
And I know you're probably anticipating the one that I'm going to bring up, but it's Romans 2:15. Or let's just go from Romans 2:14 through Romans 2:16. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. Since they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, their consciences are also bearing witness, and their thoughts either accusing or defending them. This will come to pass on that day when God will judge men's secrets through Christ Jesus as proclaimed by my gospel. So how would you make that fit with your light bulb analogy?
Well, they have a conscience. This is what Paul is telling us here, that everybody has a conscience. But Kierkegaard is taking it a little beyond that, and he's saying that they actually have love. And so that's where I have a difficulty. I'm not saying he's wrong and I'm right. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying this is what comes to my mind. I'm trying to reconcile what he's saying with my reality, with my experience with reality. I don't know if I can just blindly accept that idea. I think...
Well, what would make you think that people don't have innate love within them?
What would I think that... I would say that not all people have innate love within them. I would say that love, the kind of love that they have within them, as I put it here, that human love has been covered up with the scars of daily life. But he says that love is at the foundation of man. It may be that when we're born we have love, but I see humankind as so scarred, that this love is so scarred and so, what's the word I'm looking for? Deceived, under such a deception, that I'm not sure that I can say that I can assume that the other person has a foundation of love.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously the response. And by the way, I think we're quibbling over small details, and I'm not an utter. I'm unsettled on this issue, and I'm not trying to be too combative or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is, like, there has to be love implanted within the breast of all pagans, or else they wouldn't be able to build civilizations, right? I mean, what the things that would make us deny that there would be love within the breast of man would be the outliers of barbarousness or psychopathy, right?
That would be one group of people that I'm thinking about, the psychopaths. I'm not sure that I can say that all people have that we can always assume that everybody has this foundation of love. Also, I think that people's hearts are hardened, and we know that from the experiences of the Pharaoh, that his heart was hardened. So, in people like that as well. Plus, the kind of love that pagans have may be not true love, but they may have a love in a different sense. Love, again, fed by greed, fed by what's in it for me. Or they may have an innocent love. They certainly may have an innocent love. But I'm not sure that I can make a rule kind of that Kierkegaard is making here and saying that we should assume or presume that everybody has love. I'm not sure that I do. Maybe I even do myself in practice. I just didn't think about it until I read him saying it, and then I thought about it. And I thought, I don't know if I can really presume that everybody has love. Again, maybe in practice I do presume it. But
well, it'd be worth looking at some Rousseau and looking at some psychological studies. But I just wanted to raise the point and move on.
Okay. Let me see where I left off. Okay, our project is not to initiate love, is what he says, but to build upon it. A builder can point to his work and the teacher to the pupil as a result of his work, but love that builds up has nothing to point to. All we can say is that we presuppose that love was in the individual, and the lover therefore has no merit at all, no work to be proud of. So in this case, what he's saying is if we do not initiate love in another individual, then we can't brag about anything. We can't say, well, look at what I've done. I've created love in this individual. But rather that I've built love in this individual. And I'm not sure I really can see a difference. Why can't a person be proud of a love that he's done in an individual? I mean, if I had an individual who was addicted to something, and I went in and I gave them advice and I brought them to Christianity and turned their life around, would I not be able to kind of think thoughts that I played a role in this? I mean, maybe we shouldn't, but how is it any different that we don't? I'm not sure that we can make this distinction here between whether I initiate love in an individual or whether I build it. Does that really mean I'm going to be self-centered if I initiate love? It seems that if I brought love for the first time in an individual, I wouldn't really feel any different about it than if I built it in an individual, for me personally. So I don't really see this distinction that he's making yet. But let's continue going through here. But if something pops into your mind that you can maybe make it clearer to me, it may be simply I don't get it, what he's trying to say here. So he says that one's labor is reduced to nothing except to this presupposition that love already existed in the individual. This initial love that is presupposed is brought about by God. We do not see God doing this because God is not visible. But again, if I was to be controversial, I would say, but how then can you claim that you built upon a love? Doesn't God build upon the love? So you're taking credit for presupposing and building upon this love. How can you take credit for that? Because that's God's work as well as initiating love. So it doesn't really matter whether God initiates it or God builds it. And say, I'm failing to see his point here at as I go through this. He says a lot of people seem to think that one must first tear something down to prepare him for salvation. To change the lover into making him presuppose love in the other person requires a change to take place. So if I presuppose love in another person, I think what he's trying to tell me here is that the change actually takes place in me. That I have to have love in order to presuppose love in the other person. Actually, that's exactly what he's saying. He says, tearing down seems to satisfy the sensual man, but building up satisfies love. Now Kierkegaard takes chapter 13 from 1 Corinthians, chapter 13, and he does a little interpretation here on the fly. He says, Paul says love is patient, in quotations. Love is patient. He says it's patient because it builds up. We must persevere in this presupposition of love being present. And he says that, quotes him again, love isn't irritable or resentful. And Kierkegaard says if it were, we would be tearing down the groundwork in the other individual. But our love bears this misunderstanding of the other person, his thanklessness and his anger. Then he says that love does not insist on its own way. He says his response to this is, we have to push our way aside. So this isn't about us having our way. It's about God having his way. Then he says it does not rejoice at wrong. And let me just kind of reiterate. These are quotations taken from 1 Corinthians. So it does not rejoice at wrong. He says, it is wrong to want to tear down this love. So it's not that we want to tear down the other person so we can build up a whole new individual, but rather we want to build up on this foundation of love. And he says, love bears all things. Kierkegaard says that it's like taking nourishment out of that which is least nourishing. I guess he means it's like eating at fast food places. Even our bodies will still take nourishment out of fast food, even if it's not sitting down having, health food. Our bodies break down all food to take something good out of it. Love believes all things. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes it appears to be the opposite. So sometimes we can't see love believes all things. Because not only is it difficult to see, but sometimes we see the opposite, that love does not believe all things. We believe that it's fundamentally there, however, in the individual. Next is love hopes all things. Again, it may not be apparent. We have to act as though it's already there. And then love endures all things. As a parent endures the naughtiness of a child, we endure all things even though it may not be apparent that love is in the individual. So I know that parents out there can probably relate to this, that even though a child is naughty, we still continue to love the child. We endure misbehavior because we see something beyond it. We see something higher. We see something in the child. We see the potential. We see the kind of like the future of the child. And we want to get beyond that. We want to build upon what we see. It's not jealous or boastful. It's not arrogant or rude. It is not irritable or resentful. There's only one thing that it does, and that's it. It's upbuilding. So these are kind of the verses that he uses here to interpret and to justify his idea of presupposition. Whatever terror we see in the world, whatever we want to forget because it depresses us, we must only consider how love builds up and edifies. And love builds up by presupposing love in the other. So he makes this argument, I guess that's pretty much the foundation of his argument, of presupposition of love, that we go in to when we talk to somebody, and I'm not sure what he's talking about, evangelizing here, or just normal conversation, or just kind of like a basis proverb that we have to presuppose love in the other individual. I've kind of taken it as a basic proverb that he's trying to give us. And if that's true, then that might be the answer for me, Luke, because in Proverbs are never absolute. Proverbs are usually, under most conditions, this is true, but there are exceptions to it. But it's what we use as a proverb, is something of how we kind of base our life. And under that condition, I can accept what he's saying here if it's a basic proverb. He says that the qualities of the self are knowledge, wisdom, power, talents, these kinds of things. We don't presuppose that another person has these qualities as we do with love. If we were to think that he loved, but all others did not love, it would be a contradiction. For to love means to presuppose love in others. It gets a little sticky for me here. Look, to love someone, do you really have to presuppose the other person has love? What he's saying then is that it would be impossible to love a psychopath. It would be impossible to love someone who didn't have a foundation that you could presuppose. Something that denied your presupposition would make it impossible for you to truly love. You couldn't love under the premise that maybe God will initiate love in this individual. So that this becomes muddied for me here. Maybe you can clear it up for me a little bit. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I can. I might make it muddier. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very straightforward question. I know you'll be able to answer it probably in 2 or 3 words.
Oh, okay.
What is the imago? What is the imago Dei?
Okay, the imago Dei is in a sense the.
Right, and the reason why I'm asking this, right, is like we take it for granted that God is love, and that we are made in the image of God. And so would it be possible to have creations of God, human beings, that could be devoid of this trace of God's love?
Okay. The imago Dei is very controversial itself. Of course.
I thought you were going to answer this in 3 words.
3 words. I am right. Okay. The imago Dei is a very interesting subject. Do we take it as God implants himself in every individual? And every individual, in the Gnostic thought, every individual has this glowing amber of God within him. We all have divinity. All we need to do is fan the flames of this divinity, and we can all become godlike. So the danger of the imago Dei translated that way gives us the idea that we all are divine. We all have divinity within us. Coming to the idea that the imago Dei means we are the image of God, meaning we can see God in his creation of humanity. In other words, we can see how phenomenal God is, how intelligent he is, how loving God is by seeing what his creation is. Not necessarily that his creation has the same qualities that God has, but mimics, or at least has the capacity to express the qualities of God. So that's what I believe. I believe the imago Dei is we are all born with the ability to express the love and the wisdom and the patience and the forgiveness of God. We all have that within us, but we don't always exercise it. In the same way, it would fit into my idea of love. Now, it may be because Kierkegaard thinks of the imago Dei as something implanted within us, that this also comes into what you just said, that he believes love is in each of us. And this may be why I have a difficulty with it, because I see the imago Dei differently. So that's a lot more than 3 words.
No. All right. Well, I've got a much simpler question scenario for you here. Okay, I'm going to ratchet down the difficulty level. We're going to take it from expert to just beginner stuff. You ready for a softball question?
Oh, please, a balloon question.
All right. Here you go. Here's the slow pitch underhand. All right. So I've been thinking about this idea of that's sort of akin to your view, right? That not everyone has this glowing ember of God implanted within them. But one of the ramifications of this idea, right, is that you could essentially have human beings that are drones. That you could have human beings that, and you could create sort of a stratification of people who do and do not have this love within them. And that's a really sort of sobering, alarming kind of idea, right? That there could be people who are not really fully people on this view. So I think it's a theological problem. I told you this was going to be an easy question or an easy scenario to contemplate. But I think there's something sort of redeeming about this view, and we're getting way off track by even asking this question, is that if this is the case, that, you know, not everyone has this latent love within them, and there are these drones, and there is a stratification or something like that, you could see this being compatible with what's the word I'm looking for here? Predestinarianism?
Predestinarianism.
Did I say it right?
Yeah, well, it's a new word to me, but that's the way I would say it, yeah.
All right, so, I want to make sure I'm going to let you respond, but what I'm trying to say here, it might fit with this biblical idea of the elect. I'm sure you've got an answer prepared for that. It was a very easy question. I'm going to look up and make sure I said the word predestinarianism correctly.
Oh, okay. Well, that wasn't as softball as you. If it is, that was a beanball. You beamed me right in the middle of the eyes with it. I say that if we have, I'm not sure where you were going with drones, but if we elevate that to clones, if we create human beings or some version of them, we wouldn't have imago Dei in them. We have imago anthropy. We'd have the image of man. In other words, we would create man in the image of man, not in the image of God. If that's where you were going with that, and I'm not sure you were going that way with it, but that just kind of crossed my mind. But it isn't necessarily what man turns out like, because I think that God gives, that man is the imago Dei because he has the capacity to be, let me put it bluntly, everybody has the capacity to believe in God. Everybody has the capacity to be a Christian. That's the imago Dei for me. I don't care if you're a psychopath. I don't care if you're Adolf Hitler. You can convert, you can become a Christian. That's how we have to look at it. Now, if that's what Kierkegaard is calling a presupposition of love, I'm all for it. I have a presupposition that everybody is convertible. Everybody can become a Christian. So I don't just say, well, this guy's a pedophile. I'm not going to bother with him because he can't become a Christian. Or this guy has been labeled a psychopath or whatever, so I'm not going to bother with it. Not at all. I would bother with anybody because I believe everybody has that potential to become a Christian. So maybe that is kind of lobbing it back to you again. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Sort of.
Okay.
I mean, look, we'd have to have a whole. I'm pretty obsessed with timelines and predestination and whatnot. It is a word, predestinarianism, and a predestinarian is someone who believes in predestination. What's interesting is the Catholic Encyclopedia says predestinarianism is a heresy not unfrequently met with in the course of the centuries, which reduces the eternal salvation of the elect as well as the eternal damnation of the reprobate to one cause alone, namely to the sovereign will of God, and thereby excludes the free cooperation of man as a secondary factor in bringing about a happy or unhappy future in the life to come. So the New Advent Catholic Encyclopedia does not care for predestinarianism. But
plus,
I think
that was more than 3 words too.
Yeah.
But let me give you a quick thing of just an idea of predestination, of predestinarialism, if that's what the word is. You have two roads, and each of those roads leads to a particular place. You're in a fork in the road. You pick road number 1, you're going to get to some destination. You pick road number 2, you're going to get to another destination. Each road is predestination. You're predestined to go someplace, one place or the other place. It's not as though God is predestining you in the sense of, I'm telling you which road to pick. It's that God is saying, if you go down this road, you are predestined for this destination. And if you go down this road, you're predestined to another destination. That's how I see predestination, right or wrong. Maybe our viewers can tell us what they think of that, but that's how I view it. I don't think that God has made the choice for me. I think that that's for me to make, but my destination is predestined. So if I make this choice, I know I'm going to get to that destination. I know I'm headed for the kingdom and I'm going to get there. And that's the promise he gives me. Otherwise, I have to worry. Did I make the right decision? Or is God at the last minute going to say, I'm taking the decision away from you now? I could never be certain of my salvation if I believed that God predestined me to be saved, because that means he could always unpredestine me to be saved.
So then why did people like Luther, and I'm sorry to get this off track, but we were talking about Luther earlier, and you know something about Luther.
I do.
Why did Luther think that free will was illusory?
Luther's version of free will was man's ability to choose God. In other words, man alone, without the advent of God, without the participation of God, could not say, okay, I'm going to choose God. He says man can't do that. Only thing man can ever do is choose sin. He could never choose God. That's why many are called, few are chosen. God calls us and he chooses us. We don't call God and choose God. God chooses us because he chooses us by himself. His very presence initializes that love in us. His very presence initializes faith in us. It's not something we produce. It's something produced in us when the circumstances are right. And so it's a little different way to look at things.
Well, we're going to have to talk about all that stuff one day. Proceed with this.
Okay, I hope we do get to do that. Love isn't an exclusive characteristic like qualities of the self, like knowledge and wisdom and power. We don't have love in the same sense that we have wisdom. If you cannot presuppose love in another, you cannot build yourself up. So he's saying that the presupposition of love in another is part of who we become. So if we can't presuppose love, then we ourselves don't get built up. When you have doubts that you have love, it is the lover who presupposes love in you. So if we're thinking to ourselves, I'm unlovable, I don't have love, I am a psychopath. Well, our lover is there to tell us, no, you're not. I see love in you. I know you have love in you. That's, I think, the role, the dynamic that he's trying to tell us. That the lover is the one who builds that love back up in us when we start to feel that we don't have love, and we doubt our love. If a person did not have a presupposition of love, of your love, you would not be able to abandon yourself to such an individual, and give him your trust. So if a person does not presuppose love in you, you would not be able to trust such an individual. You would not be able to abandon yourself to such an individual. And I don't know, I think there's an awful lot of people that have abandoned themselves to people who don't have love. I think we have historical evidence that there are a lot of people who followed and have abandoned their own lives to people who don't have love. So I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with him here. If I'm understanding him correctly, maybe I'm not understanding him correctly. I like to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's a brilliant man, and I'm not. So, to love means to build up from the ground up. This
is where I say, Bob. This is where I say you are brilliant.
Well, you are the one who builds me up. So thank you.
You're very brilliant. Well, don't tell yourself anything different.
Okay, I'll try not to. So here he sums up the whole thing here. To love means to build up from the ground up. So love is the ground of everything. And no man can create love as this groundwork. We cannot create love. And there is no love, it can never... if there is no love, it can never be built. I agree with him there. And the idea here is, I don't think his conclusion is different than my conclusion. I just think we're getting there in different ways. Because no man can build love in another individual. No man can create love in another individual. It's all up to God. God has to be the source of true love. I'm talking about true love, divine love. So that is pretty much where we'll leave it for today. Just want to encourage people, if they didn't write in any questions during the live broadcast, and to be fair, we didn't give people any warning about this. This is something we're just kind of trying out now to see if this will work. And if we get questions, we'd love to be able to answer them online, live, if we can. It's your opportunity to put Luke and me on the spot. But if there are any other questions, they can leave them on the YouTube version, or I think you have a place where people can ask questions on the app, right?
Yeah. If they're listening to this in the future.
Okay.
Yes. What I was going to say here is, while we were, it was sort of a spontaneous decision to pull back the veil and let people participate in the live function today. I looked into it a little bit, and actually it requires a little bit more of there's a few apps and things like that I have to download so we can integrate it with Facebook and Twitter, so we can actually reach our larger audience when we stream live. So I'll have that set up for us next week. But a great lesson as usual, Bob. Here, how about we close with this? I want to ask you a question. You just answer it with yes, no, or maybe, okay?
Well, that's all right. I'll try.
All right, because I'm really fascinated by this question lately. It has nothing to do with Kierkegaard, but we were talking about predestinarianism earlier. So and multiple timelines and things of that nature. Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead.
In your sagacious opinion, was Jesus Christ a time traveler?
Wow.
Yes, no, or maybe?
Yes. How's that for an answer?
I love it. We'll build on that next week.
Did I surprise you?
I think he was. Well,
he came from eternity into temporality. I can't think of it. What's the
temporality?
Temporality. So that's traveling in time.
Right, and he comes right. This presupposes that eternity and temporality are two different things, right?
And he traveled into the world of prophets in the old days, and then he traveled as a human in these days. So, in modern days, and he's still here today. So, I have to say, yes, he is a time traveler.
I think we need to look into this Jesus Christ time traveler theory a little bit more.
Okay.
All right.
I think I see a book in the future. A book on Jesus Christ, the time traveler.
If time travel was available, we could just go and get it, and I wouldn't have to write it, or not this version of it.
Okay. All right.
All right, man. I'm gonna bring this to a close. I'll do the audio editing and so I don't sound like a robot. And thank you for listening, everybody. Download the Noetic app. I swear, big things are coming. I'm just got a lot on my plate. More soon. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.